Hi everyone, I'm sure you've all been waiting for this video. And now the right amount of chapters are finally out. A little spoiler from me, the chapters were really cool, so I recommend everyone to watch the video to the end. And here is the guy who was lucky enough to get in this legendary video. If you also want to get a chance to be in the video, write something in the comments and maybe you will be in the next video. And I want to wish everyone an enjoyable viewing experience. In Lloyd's manor, there was a knock on the door, and then a completely exhausted guy asked to come in, the one who knocked. It turned out that it was a girl who looked at the completely broken protagonist, who clearly felt terrible. She instantly began to apologize for entering his room, and suggested that the protagonist continue to rest, while Lloyd began to get out of bed, saying that there was nothing wrong with the girl's actions, and he wondered what had happened. She immediately began to hand over a letter that was addressed to Lloyd. The guy accepted the letter, under the girl's words that it was an invitation to the wedding. The girl confessed that she was marrying Kujur. She seemed to want Lloyd to be there. The boy began to look at the letter under the girl's words that only Lloyd had gotten such an invitation, because only thanks to him this day could happen. While on the face of the protagonist there was no emotion at all, it seemed that he was completely shattered and simply lost the ability to feel anything past sadness. After the girl, with a sincere smile, began to tell that only thanks to Lloyd in their lands reigns peace, and all live happily. While the boy silently lowered his head, then put on a very sad smile, and thanked her for the words she said, because he was happy to hear them. Lloyd jumped up from his bed. While the girl asked the protagonist not to move, she wanted to bring him a new blanket. Lloyd stood at the door thinking that he always dreamed that all people around him would be happy. Then he congratulated the girl on her marriage, and instantly slammed the door, leaving the maid standing in the hallway. The protagonist felt even worse, for he was completely powerless, and could not help these beautiful people in any way. He remembered Pearl's words that the only solution to this situation was that Lloyd or Xavier had to die. Lloyd thought that Xavier could not die. He was the real hero of this world. And then Lloyd's heart was attacked again by a huge cold force, which made him feel bad, and he fell to the ground in terrible pain and agony. Lloyd started to think that there was a way to save all these people. He started to think that if he died, people would be happy and would not die, while the system window appeared right in front of the protagonist's face saying that his death would not help. It started saying that Lloyd still hasn't gotten his wish, and as long as he is alive, he can do anything. After these unexpected words, the system window began to disappear, while the protagonist was left lying on the ground enveloped in the particles of the system. The guy began to close his eyes, falling more and more into the depths of his consciousness, after which Lloyd finally lost his consciousness. At that time, an incredibly horrible creature appeared in the deep sea, which was definitely hostile to humans. While the ruler of the land where the monster appeared watched and pondered on what he saw before him, namely the huge number of monsters that filled the water in front of him. While in another part of the world, there was a strange structure that instantly began to crack. At that time in the kingdom of Samarkand, king did not understand who dared to attack their land, while his subordinate explained that there were strange heretics who attacked them under the cover of some god. At that time in the forest, a huge monster was chasing the small animals. The elven women prepared to shoot, and they just couldn't understand where such a huge number of hostile monsters came from, and feared that if this continued, all the peaceful animals would simply disappear. The queen began to report about the problems in the world, which arose at the same time, namely that the monsters appeared en masse, the appearance of Gigaton, and the rebellion of heretics in the kingdom of Aspahan. The queen simply could not understand how such a huge number of events could take place at the same time. While Xavier was moving at great speed towards the queen, the dragon carried a huge luggage with unknown contents, and then landed on the ground, delivering what Xavier wanted to present to the queen. Xavier greeted the queen, getting down on one knee. The girl looked at him silently, not understanding what was going on. Then she instantly asked what Xavier wanted. He seemed not to understand what the queen was talking about as she continued to stare at him with her gaze. Xavier looked like the most innocent child who just couldn't do anything. The queen asked him to stop making that face and asked what was wrong, while Xavier started talking about how he would like to offer a huge amount of iron to the queen for military reinforcement. The queen was thinking about what she should do, when suddenly a very bright light appeared, which immediately attracted the girl's attention, She looked in that direction, not understanding what was going on because some music started playing. In front of the girl began to descend to the ground a real angel from the heavens themselves. He appeared right in front of the people, with all the signs of a real angel, namely a halo and wings. The men were just shocked that they managed to see a real angel in their lives, while the queen could not understand what the angel was doing in this place. The angel began to say that he was carrying the will of heaven and that he was going to give it to the queen. The angel started shouting that the queen should immediately give the protagonist the Eye of Summer. Then he instantly started to disappear, and at a great speed right in front of the queen he started to fly to the heavens. After just one moment there was absolutely nothing left in the place where the angel used to stand. The queen began to think that it was definitely a trick of Lloyd, because it looked suspicious. The queen began to shout and ask Xavier if it was true, while the boy himself was shaking with excitement. The man started yelling that they just had to hand over the Eye of Summer to the protagonist, because it was a real godsend, while the other aristocrats began to say that the angel spoke very uncertainly, and it looked like it was just some kind of deception. Eventually a verbal altercation broke out between the aristocrats, in which they were deciding whether this angel was real or not. The man began to shout with all his might that angels are simply incapable of lying, and it is not even necessary to doubt the purity of the angel's words. Xavier watched the situation unfolding before his eyes very carefully. He remembered that the old angel immediately on Xavier's proposal began to say that angels cannot lie, and he cannot fulfill the request of the guy. Xavier asked what the old man thought was a lie, and then immediately began to say that simply by passing his words on to the queen they would not lie. The men continued to argue fiercely, while the queen sat on her throne trying to understand the situation. Xavier thought that everything was going according to plan, and the only thing left was for the queen to believe in what was happening. While the queen herself thought deeply about whether what the angel had said was true, because a very valuable artifact was at stake. A little while later, on a clear day, the queen asked Xavier alone if the angel was just a trick from Lloyd, and Xavier sincerely said that it was. The queen was surprised that the boy had confessed at once, and assumed that the theater was over from that point on, while Xavier began to explain that the reason he had to pretend was to divert the attention of the advisors. Xavier also added that no matter how hard he tried to deceive the queen, she would easily expose him with her shrewdness, and she said that these words reminded him very much of Lloyd, for he liked to flatter. Xavier immediately turned pale, and she began to say that he would not like to be so much humiliated as to be compared to Lloyd, while the queen agreed with the same expression, for she was disgusted to see it. Xavier confessed that the angel was real, which didn't surprise the queen, causing Xavier to misunderstand, which the girl dispelled by saying that it was Lloyd, a man who could outwit even a divine dragon. The girl decided to get right to the point, and asked why they needed the Eye of Summer. While Xavier was silent for a while and looked at the floor, he confessed that his young master was dying right now. Such information shocked the queen. This was definitely not the answer she had expected to hear. While at the main character's estate, the maid brought him food, and he asked the girl to just leave her at the door. She tried to clean the guy's room, but he said he didn't need it. The girls looked at each other, realizing that Lloyd was in a terrible state. Finally the maid decided to ask as Lloyd had asked, for which the boy thanked her. They started to leave, while the food continued to stand by the door. It stood even after the girl's footsteps stopped being heard. Suddenly the main character's door was ajar, whereupon the guy instantly stuck his hand out and grabbed the bowl of food. He sat in his room, where there was a huge number of similar bowls, which proved that Lloyd completely stopped eating. The protagonist continued to feel terrible not only mentally but also physically. At that time, the queen inquired what this restoration of destiny was. Xavier began to talk about how they learned the name of this phenomenon, what it leads to, and that, in order to deal with it, they were advised to build the Pearl of Truth. The girl began to think that all the troubles that are now beginning to happen to the world are a consequence of the fact that the protagonist once stopped them. She just realized that everything was starting to go back to the way it was supposed to be. As Lloyd sat in his room leaning against the door, his lips completely dry and hollows appearing in his cheeks from the fact that he hadn't eaten anything in a long time. One of the main character's pets was hugging his master. He was very worried about Lloyd's condition. Suddenly a system window started to appear where the images of the protagonist's parents appeared, which made the pet more determined, and together with the other pets they started trying to get the protagonist back on his feet, while the guy was talking about how he just didn't have the strength to even walk. The pets kept trying to cheer up the protagonist, who suggested that he couldn't keep leaving them locked up. Eventually Lloyd left the room with the pets, and followed them, not realizing where they were trying to lead after all. Lloyd heard the voice of his mother, who was very worried about him, because his condition was getting worse every day. Lloyd stood in the hallway and listened to his mother, not believing Xavier that Lloyd was just resting, and was very worried about her son. She also began to say with a mug in her hands that Xavier was always trying to protect Lloyd. She then told her husband that even when Lloyd changed because of him, he defended Lloyd, justifying everything with lies. While the protagonist instantly became much worse, his body began to feel terrible pain and his breathing became more rapid. The man began to say that if Xavier was trying to help so sincerely, Lloyd was really a worthwhile person. The girl agreed with her husband's words, and began to say that the protagonist would be fine after he was back to normal, when he himself would explain to them how everything had happened. The man also believed that this was exactly what would happen. While the protagonist started running at a great speed down the hallway, he was very quickly approaching his room, after which the guy instantly opened the doors and went inside. He started to pull out a blanket with the thoughts that he just had to live. After that he started to eat his food with all his might. There was finally a purpose in his behavior. He sat at the table eating, with the window open. Then with a confident look he thought about the fact that he just had to tell the truth to the real Lloyd's parents. As the Queen began to talk about how Xavier had done the right thing, and added that they needed to resolve the conflict between those who believed in the angel and those who thought it was some kind of deception. Xavier began to say that he knew of only one person who could resolve the issue, while the Queen said that Lloyd was dying now, and was doing his best to keep himself alive. Then under Xavier's gaze the Queen said that only Lloyd could stop the restoration of fate, and thus protect her entire kingdom. After she said these words, the Queen began to smile, then with the same smile on her face began to say that convincing people to work was her forte. Xavier smiled as well, as he was sure that together, they would do well. As the protagonist sat in his room thinking that the first thing he needed to do to improve his condition was to deal with his panic attacks, he looked at his pets, who were trying their best to help him. The protagonist thought about what plan he should make in order to survive. Although he had a plan to extend his life a bit, he needed a plan to resist the restoration of fate. The protagonist gritted his teeth thinking that even though the thought of failure would not leave him, he had to face it and overcome it. As the dragon began to approach the protagonist's house, Lloyd instantly noticed his pet. Xavier began to tell the protagonist's father that he had some very important guests waiting for him, and he had to go out as soon as possible. The parents didn't understand who could be so important to visit their estate, while the red hair was developing in the wind. The girl clutched at her dress, saying that she had heard a lot about the couple, but was seeing them for the first time. She introduced herself to the main character's parents as the queen of this empire, and that she was the main character's fiancée. The parents didn't seem to realize these words and just stood there with a relaxed expression, then instantly went into a wild shock after realizing the words that the queen herself had just spoken. They instantly fell to their knees, surprised that the queen herself had come to them, asking the parents of the hero to calm down, because she is still the fiancée of the main character. Then the queen looked at Lloyd and asked if it was true. While Lloyd stood staring out the window not understanding anything, Lloyd's face at the moment of realizing the queen's words is not easy to describe in words. To put it mildly, he was fucked up. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. I want to say some very important information about Lloyd's video series. I would love to publish a video every day on this manhwa. I enjoy reading it myself, but the chapters come out very rarely, and the most I can do is release one 15-minute video every 2 to 3 weeks. So I hope you won't ignore my other videos, because during their creation I also put an incredible amount of effort. Thank you all for being there, for writing in the comments, and for watching and liking the videos. See you all again.